Okay, I think there's still people joining us, but in the interest of time, we'll make a start. Good morning, I'm Stuart Foster, CEO of Recoup, and welcome to what's the 7th in our series of plastic recycling resource webinars. This one focused on opportunities and challenges for plastic resource efficiency recycling in the farming sector. Thank you in advance to our fantastic set of speakers today for the time. If you've got a question during the session, please use the Q&A function, which can be found in the menu at the bottom of the screen if you're on PC or laptop. These will be used by the chair for panel questions and discussion during the session. We're going to prepare a short document for any questions asked that we can't answer during the session, which will be circulated to all delegates afterwards, with copies of the slides where available. Please don't use the chat function or virtually raise your hand, as we won't be monitoring those during the session. Also, just to confirm that only our speakers and chair have access to the camera and microphone, and the webinar is being recorded. I hope that most of you are familiar with Recoup and its aims across plastic resource efficiency, recycling and protecting the environment. We're a cross-sector membership-based charity set up in 1990, and there are 3 pillars under which our activities sit, including strategy, project and education. And within those areas, there's a whole raft of core activities each year, which are agreed with 150 members and board. Recoup is independent, covering all plastic format sectors and parts of the value chain. And importantly, with so much opinion, politics and greenwash around environmental issues, we base our work on evidence, research, fact and integrity. If you'd like to receive key updates and reports from us, just email inquiry@recoup.org and ask to be added to the circulation list. We're part of many groups and platforms, including the recently launched Waste Compliance Task Force, which is a working group dedicated to exports and plastics and includes work on agricultural plastic flows markets and working with both industry and regulator partners to promote legal waste handling in the farming sector. Despite COVID-19, actually the long-term ambitions around plastic resources are still very relevant and applicable. Recoup support from members and project sponsors continues to grow, and we've remained busy on a range of activities this year. However, we've also got a desire to do more specifically in the farming sector, and we're going to be developing further work with relevant partners into 2021. We've always had an interest in the sector and introduced a successful breakout session for farming at our annual conference in 2019. And whilst our next annual conference is now not due until the end of September 2021, we wanted to provide a follow-up virtual session for interested stakeholders. We need to ensure coordinated and meaningful support of information, innovations and solutions in the materials used, the systems implemented, strategies adopted, and importantly, the barriers still to overcome, because we all know this is very much work in progress. There's a lot of similarities between farm plastic resource and recycling opportunities and challenges worldwide. There's a lot we can learn from other countries and their experiences. Recoup are UK members within EPRO, the European Association of Plastic Recycling Recovery Organisations. But EPRO also goes beyond Europe. I'm particularly pleased that my EPRO colleague Barry Friesen from Clean Farms in Canada, and also in a very different time zone to us, can actually join us today and share his insights as well. EPRO is a fantastic international platform which Recoup have been involved in for many years to share knowledge and expertise. We've got a really effective farm plastics working group which generates so much good content, knowledge and sharing of expertise. I'm actually looking at how Recoup can take a more active role moving forward, maybe with the support of some of you on the webinar today. So the session today is going to be in the capable hands of our session chair, Mike Baxter from Berry Global, who's also a Recoup trustee. But before Mike starts the session, I'd first like to hand over to Trevor Gibson from Opportunity Peterborough. In an alternate universe where 2020 was normal, we were going to be involved in a farming and plastic resources event with Opportunity Peterborough, which unfortunately coincided with the first week of lockdown part 1 back in March and subsequently cancelled. So I hope you all enjoyed today. I hope in 2021 we can pick up all of our plans again in this sector. In the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Trevor to say a few words. Trevor?
Thank you very much, Stuart. And yes, unfortunate that our plans were scuppered earlier in the year, but I'm sure normality will resume eventually, and we'll all come back bigger and better with events like this. So Good morning from me, and again, welcome to all of those joining. My name's Trevor Gibson. I work for an organisation called Opportunity Peterborough, in Peterborough, obviously. It's an economic development company owned by the City Council, and essentially is tasked with building a vibrant, resilient, diverse and indeed a sustainable economy. And it's that last bit that I'm particularly focused on. I'm focused on sustainability, and in particular circular Peterborough, and I'll say a little bit more about that later on. It's really good to have an organisation as nationally and indeed internationally important as Recoup, based in the city. Peterborough has a strong reputation around sustainability, which it's had for many, many years. We have Peterborough Environment City Trust. In Peterborough, we have the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. We have Recoup, Frog Life, you name it. There's a lot of organisational focus around sustainability in the city, and Recoup really leads the way on many aspects of that. So it's really good to be part of that network. I mentioned Circular Peterborough, and briefly just want to talk you through that. It aims to transform the city into a circular city. I haven't got long to talk about the concept of circular economy, but I'm sure it's well known to many of you joining today. So to make Peterborough circular by 2050 as part of its response to the global challenge of climate change. Circular Peterborough's got a number of facets based around a roadmap, all of which you can find on the Opportunity Peterborough website. We raise awareness through focused events such as the one we were going to be working on with Stuart and his colleagues. We share information through our website. We identify and share aspects of best practice. We have a Circular Peterborough commitment, which enables businesses to sign up to the vision, aims and objectives of making the city more circular. And last but not least, we have a sharing platform, Share Peterborough, which enables organisations, businesses to share surplus items, equipment, space, vehicles, transport, whatever, and also for businesses that are registered to request things that they need. So it really starts to build a sharing economy across the city and beyond. At the heart of the approach is our 7 Rs around rethinking, redesigning, reducing, reuse, recover, recycle, and remanufacture. And all of those, in many ways, are relevant to the topic of today's workshop. Peterborough as a city, just to localise things for a moment, Peterborough as a city is very much more than its urban context. It's rural hinterland, a home to some of the most important food production areas in the UK and indeed across Europe. Like many sectors, agriculture has become reliant to a certain degree on plastics in terms of protecting, transporting food produce all the way from the field through to ultimate sale in our shops and supermarkets. It protects crops and food products at all of those stages. The nature of agricultural activity, though, makes recycling, reducing recycling and reusing such plastics very challenging, often due to the levels of contamination experienced. But in that challenge lies multiple significant opportunities to innovate and to do things differently. And that's really the focus of today's workshop. The outputs, as Stuart's mentioned, will be widely shared, and we'll certainly be using those to inform our Circular Peterborough activities going forward as we try and move the city towards a zero waste world, something that might seem a long way off at the moment, but certainly there's greater awareness of the importance of that concept. The benefits of changing our approach are significant and will play an absolutely crucial part in tackling the global challenge of climate change. So that leap from the field, if you like, to something as global as climate change is something I think we should all bear in mind as we talk about a very specific topic here. So that leaves me to say thank you to Stuart and the team at Recoup for inviting me to say a few words today on behalf of Opportunity Peterborough. Very much looking forward to the presentations today and on learning a great deal more about this important topic. So thank you very much indeed, and I'd like to hand over now to Mike Baxter.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm waiting for the slide to move across, but it isn't. So, here we are. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining and welcome. Well, who'd have thought when I chaired the first session of agricultural films in Peterborough last year that at the next conference we'd all be sitting in our offices at home looking out at the birds and the bees. I expect a lot of you have got used to these now. I have. And whilst they may be environmentally supportive, we're not traveling, etc. The Recoup conference, which we've been sponsors of now for many years, was one of the highlights in the calendar. It certainly was for me. And we sponsored it when we were BPI, British Polythene Industries PLC, and then when we became RPC, we continued the sponsorship and under Berry. But we're still exactly the same underneath, and we're still delighted to support Stuart. There will be, as Stuart said, at the end of the session, Q&As, and if there are any pertinent questions after each speaker's session, then I will interject. We've got 4 great speakers today, and I'll introduce them as they go through the running order. But the first speaker is actually great for me. You know, a lot of us, I know on this call, we're Ink Pen members, we're British Plastics Federation, we're Food and Drink, we're all the trade associations. And you do tend to get the same old speakers up over and over again. I know a lot of you are fed up with looking at me. But the first speaker we've got, I actually, because we've all got busy diaries, I've never heard Judy speak before. And you're all very fortunate, because Judy Proctor is the lead in the Environment Agency in this field. And I think everybody recognises that what Judy doesn't know about this subject from the agency isn't worth knowing. So without further ado, Judy, it's over to you, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. And that's quite an introduction, and I'm sure there is loads I don't know, and I'm hoping to learn more from today as well. So good morning, everybody, and my name is Judy Proctor. I work for the Environment Agency, and yes, I sort of coordinate and set strategic direction around our work around plastics. So if I can move to the next slide. So as the Environment Agency, and we cover a number of areas, but my work around plastics does cut across all. So as an operator, we think about the plastics in our supply chain, and I've recently produced a construction guide for how we use plastics in issues like flood defense. As an advisor, really making sure that we based our interventions on sound evidence, and as a regulator, thinking about how we work with businesses and what they need to hear from us in the way of regulation, but also understanding where regulation can be a barrier as well. To really thinking about 2 aspects around plastics. One is how we can reduce them escaping into the environment, and the other is how we can support that development of a circular economy for plastics. So next slide, please. I wanted to sort of put agriculture into perspective in the way of plastic waste within the UK. So it is a smaller waste stream, but it is an important one for us because it is one that we do see escaping into the environment. It does cause issues. And I think it's also quite a big cost on the farming industry, and it is one that is important to the whole supply chain through retail and consumers. So if I could go to the next slide, please. And if you just click on, there's 3 small messages here, and we've already picked up on the fact that climate emergency is really important to our work around plastics. They have a large carbon footprint, embedded carbon. But so do all materials. So really thinking about how we reduce all of the materials we use and what is the most overall sustainable option is important. Next slide, please. But one of the areas that we focus on around, so if we could go to the next slide. So one of the areas that we try and focus on, I said, is plastics escaping into the environment. So it's not the material that is the problem, but it is where they escape into the environment. And the previous slide just had pictures around where larger bits of plastic are found in the environment, whether that's them escaping from film left in fields, or whether it's through materials applied to land, compost sludges that have plastics and microplastics within them. There were also around the kind of more around the waste crime, poor waste management practices. So one of the reasons we're concerned is that they do there are microplastics within sludges and soils, and they do enter the food chain. The earthworms do take them up. The important thing for us, unfortunately, is that we do not understand the consequences of that. So we do not understand fully the aspects of harm around microplastics. So if we go to the next slide. So with another couple of examples of where microplastics have been found in mussels in UK waters, but also in lugworms. And the University of Exeter work showed that there was harm, that the lugworms didn't grow as quickly, but the concentrations that we used there were far higher than we find in the environment. So what we have framed our regulation around this more emerging issue around microplastics is we ought to adopt a precautionary approach, and one that prevents microplastics escaping into the environment, but that all the actions we need to take should be practical and ones that where we work in partnership with others. So if we could move on, please. And as I say, I provide a bit of strategic direction across Environment Agency, and that's thinking about how we understand the sources, pathways and impacts around plastics, how we help support and drive a more circular economy, how we work with government around the Environment Bill and Resources and Waste Strategy, really thinking about how we evolve regulation, preventing microplastics escaping into the water environment, and then thinking about ourselves, what we do and trying to be exemplary in what we do, and absolutely supporting others and working in partnership. So next slide. I've used the, we worked with Defra and worked on some questions to put into the Farm Practices survey back in 2019. And these were questions asked of all the farmers in the in England. And what's interesting is that what it demonstrated was that farmers were concerned about plastic pollution, but didn't have a great deal of knowledge around some of the options and the things that they could do. So next slide, please. And I think also when we want to work with the farming sector, it's important for us to be able to talk, what are the benefits? So what are the things that we need to help address in order to change a system where we see quite widespread non-compliance with managing waste on farms? There is quite a lot of anecdotal. We have specific incidents around burning of plastics and burying of plastics. And what we want to move to is a system where there are farmers are able to take the action they need in order to reduce and reuse and recycle the materials on farms, particularly plastics, and avoid the sort of the risks that provides. So if I could go on to the next slide. And then for some of we talked about some of the problems, but thinking about some of the opportunities and how we're trying to work. Well, one is the fact that we are trying to focus on reducing the impact of plastics in agricultural production, and we do want to work with the agri supply chain. So conferences like today are really important to what we do. And going back to what Stuart was talking about and the sort of principles around recoup, really thinking about that sound evidence base. And so these are some of the areas where we've worked. One is thinking about that future farming policy network, working with different farm assurance schemes, and an example around how we work with RSPCA Assured about plastics in enrichment soil, which I've just summarised on the next slide. We've worked with LeafMark. They are pulling together some waste and pollution guidance. We've also been talking to the NFU next and the product side. We've produced some case studies. We've working on biodegradable crop cover mulches and what that means for our regulation. We've done some work around clear messaging, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail, and thinking about regulatory improvements to the bio-waste situation, and work on strengthening our compliance and working with some agricultural colleges, which is funded by an Interreg project. So next slide, please, and I'll just touch on a couple of those. This is a case study that I'll leave you to read in afterwards, but it's basically, we had a report around plastics in a slurry, and it was due to the escape of plastic enrichment toys getting into that slurry and being spread to land and causing concern to people who reported that in. If I could go to the next slide, please. The other area that we've worked on is thinking about biowaste, so composts and anaerobic digestion, digestate, materials spread to land, and really thinking about how we can reduce the contamination at source in the feedstocks, how we can work with those who process, and thinking about permit reviews, and then finally thinking about how we strengthen the limits of what can be spread to land. And in the beginning of this year, we produced a new strategy for a safe and sustainable disposal of sludge. Okay, if I could go to the next slide, please. So key actions for farmers is something we're working on, is having just a simple, collated, integrated set of messages, being really clear around the regulatory side, around managing waste on farms, but also thinking and bringing in some of the opportunities to handle these more as products and put value into the supply chain, and then using that to really inform how we work in partnership with others, how we do that advice-led regulation that we work, and really trying to think how we use that to build capacity within the industry, the future farming that I've mentioned, and what are the upstream regulatory interventions? How do we work with others to try and reduce the impacts that we see and help with the challenges? On to the next slide, please. This is just an example, which is we've framed them under 3 themes: managing resources sustainably, managing your resources well, and protecting your livelihood. So really trying to be simple, simple framework, and really being explicit and clear around what people can do. And that's important because, you know, going back to the evidence, the farm practices showed that there wasn't good understanding around what people needed to do and who can collect that waste. And then finally, I wanted to end up with explaining that one of the things that is, next slide please, that one of the things that is really important to us is making sure that waste is handled appropriately, and probably something that's very important to Mike is that what we are also trying to do is to prevent the illegal export of agricultural plastics. So these can't be as exported as a green list waste. They are contaminated, and we need to make sure that the illegal waste exports are prevented so that that material is available to reprocessors. So I hope it's given you a flavour around what we do in some of the issues, and I'll hand back to Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. That was great. And yeah, we do, and I'm now speaking on behalf of sort of the recyclers in the UK. We do appreciate the work that your team have been putting in the last 12 months on this issue. I could be a bit churlish and say shame it wasn't done earlier, but of course I wouldn't. Now, you know me. I have had one question actually for you before you rush off. And it says, what do you think about PLA degradability? Polylactic.
So what we've been trying to do around the sort of compostable plastics, biodegradable plastics, and then original is be very clear that what we are trying to we're working with Defra over is we would like to see standards so that there is a biodegradable standard. At the moment, the PAS standard is not one that is suitable for fresh waters and marine waters. There is a standard within the EU fertilizer regs, and that is the one at the moment we're trying to work through. What is our regulatory position if these are left in situ? What is the impact on soils? But it is an area where there is sort of lacking that understanding and real evidence around what that means for soils. What is the standard is that they fully biodegrade within 2 years, but if they are used multiple times, then what does that mean for the soil? So it is one of those areas that I think the market is moving ahead of the regulation. There are lots of products coming on board, and we don't fully understand impacts. So as I say, one of the areas that we are definitely working with Defra on is trying to get to a position where we could have recognized standards and then certification schemes that meet those, so that then these plastics are dealt with in a correct way, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. I'm 100% supportive of what the agency are doing here. Hope you all noticed I said that again, 100% supportive of the agency, because it really worries me that the debate just gets fouled up in greenwash and propaganda. And you know, we've always said for years, we welcome the debate, but it's got to be science-based. And I'm afraid so often it isn't science-based, it's emotion-based. So I think what the agency are doing here is great. It's going to take time. You know, you can't, I know from work I've done with Exeter University, these things don't happen overnight. But anyway, Judy, it was worth all these years to wait for me to hear you speak. It really was. And I, as you know, I spent a lot of time working with your boys and girls, so it's great to meet the driving force at long last. We really appreciate it. If anybody's got any other questions for Judy, if you just fill them in on the Q&A form. I've had 2 more come in now since I started talking, so I've got to go on to the next speaker. I'll come back to those. Judy isn't rushing off, so if there's any more relevant questions and we got time, we'll fit them in at the end. If we can't answer all of them now, then we will do that to you in email. So Judy, thanks again, and on to our next speaker, please. Okay, so now we're going to hear the view from the farming sector. The National Farmers Union, the NFU, absolutely key. I live in, some of you know, I live out in the countryside, as a lot of our speakers appear to actually, and I'm a firm believer in farm to fork and support the NFU. And I think, as in all things to do with plastics recycling, it's only by all stakeholders working together in the chain are we going to achieve the outcomes we want. The EA can't do it on their own. I, as a plastics recycler, can't do it on my own. The NFU can't do it on their own. And we need the support of the retailers as well. So it's great that we've got Simon Fisher here today from the NFU. Simon's the Environment and Land Use Advisor for the East Midlands, which is where I'm based as well. So Simon, thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us today. Over to you.
Brilliant. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. And thank you, Mike, for your introduction. I have to say that from an East Midlands perspective, all I seem to have been doing for the last 18 months is floods and the recovery work from that. But so it's actually a little bit refreshing to look at another problem. This morning, I want to try and present a sort of ground floor view of plastics in the farming sector. And that's a very basic one. I've been in many meetings with farmers over a fairly long career in the NFU where issues around disposal were discussed. I don't claim to be a policy expert on this or indeed a recycling technician. So here we go. Next slide, please. This slide basically says that farming has multiple uses of plastic. Much like the rest of society. I don't intend to list all of those uses, but what we need to note is that, and this is as with the rest of society, the increase in plastic use means that there's more plastic requires to be recycled. And if you like, the traditional disposal method, and many years ago that was just a box of matches, is no longer the option. And in fact, it was actually burning plastics like that on a farm was actually banned over a decade ago. Next slide, please. Hello, right. Over that decade, I suppose the other significant change that we have now is that consumers and society, their awareness of plastics as a waste has probably reached the highest profile it's ever been, and no doubt boosted by celebrity profiles from many people, but foremost in the UK, we've got David Attenborough and Hugh Fearnley witching these TV programmes. And as with many other emergencies we've got at the moment, I think the declaration of war on plastic is slightly misleading. I think it should be called a war on waste plastic, and that's a fairly important distinction in the mind of consumers and societies that probably doesn't come around very quickly. Next slide, please. The benefits of plastic to agriculture are many, and it's important to emphasize that plastic does have a place in agriculture. It provides many of these benefits, and there's a number of bullet points listing them there. These are benefits that help boost agricultural productivity, benefits that can extend shelf life and reduce food waste, benefits that actually can, for example, create top quality feed for livestock. Silage wrap, as insidious as it might appear, actually helps to preserve grass for winter feed rations and the like. So it's pretty useful stuff in the industry and has been for many years. Next slide, please. From point of view of managing farm plastics, increasingly farmers have had to manage them. While, as Julie's already indicated, agriculture accounts for a relatively small proportion of plastic use in the UK, with its use comes responsibilities. And the industry certainly wants to make sure it disposes of plastic responsibly, and the sector is actually regulated when it comes to the use of plastic. So, for example, we can store plastics for up to 12 months. We can store it separately, which helps with collection and recycling. So keeping dirty plastics with soil on it out of other plastics, cleaner plastics, or maybe ensuring that plastic containers used to buy plant protection products, pesticides, are segregated. There's quite good guidance on the handling and segregation and storage of waste plastic before its removal, and that obviously all helps to collect and recycle. And I was quite pleased to see Judy's mention helping and guiding and providing advice into the farming community on the question of plastics. Some of our waste plastics are actually subject to the packaging regulations. We're probably all familiar with that. So the original producer must pay towards the cost of collection, and certain products, plastic products in agriculture, so pesticide containers, fertilizer and seed bags, for example, are covered by that. However, there are some plastics which fall outside that legislation, such as silage wrap, baler twine, plastics used to cover crops in the early season, and polytunnel films that are harder to deal with and probably more difficult to recycle, and we know that in turn then increases cost. Next slide, please. There are some interesting alternatives at the present time, and this is one solution, or at least part of the solution, which will be the development of alternatives to plastic. It very much feeds into this concept of reducing the use of plastic. And some of the interesting illustrations on this slide. Potato starch and corn starch, we grow that stuff, can be made into bioplastic, and there you've got applications for things like food packaging, pharmaceutical packaging, and even down to these days, and even the NFU's magazine wrappers come as biodegradable plastic, and it's high performing and it's compostable. So obviously, accepting that there shouldn't be any issues arising out of that sort of use of bioplastic, we have interesting developments there. But it even gets down to in sort of more detail when you look at that baler, pretty modern baler up on the screen there. Baler and wrapper technology has given us machines now that can wrap a bale in a film rather than in a net or twine. It's easier to use at the other end when the farmer is feeding his livestock. It actually gives a better, tighter bale, which is less exposed to the air and therefore preserves the feed value, the nutrient value of that crop. And it gives us a single material rather than several different types of plastic to segregate and dispose of. And these technological developments continue. The three guys stood leaning up against the bale there and not just waiting for the next pint. There are PhD students inventing an edible bale wrap, and that's a really good example of innovation. No plastic waste in that, and it reduces farm waste. And the last illustration, those very good looking tomatoes, come from an NFU tomato grower who actually uses the leaves from his tomato plants to create the punnets to pack his tomatoes in. That's really good innovative thinking and a good way to use the leaves, which of course, ordinarily would be a waste product. Of course, while alternatives are interesting and have their place, we may need to be careful that we don't invest in another environmental problem. We do need sound science, and that's already been illustrated by the chairman. And hang on a minute. Sorry, just turn the call off. We don't invest in another environmental problem. Sound science and data is there to make sure that changes don't become, if you like, the next unseen microplastic pollution. Next slide, please. This is my last slide for the benefit of the chairman. What do we need to do? My last slide is designed to help provide some pointers to what we need to do going forward from an NFU perspective. I have to thank my headquarters colleague, Philippa Arnold, in this context, and more locally, we have along at Loddington in Rutland, a guy called Phil Jarvis, who's the NFU's Environment Forum Chair at national level, but also is the Farms Manager for GWCT at Loddington. And for about 10 years, Phil ran a collection centre in the locality to recycle waste plastic. It was part of their business. Doesn't run anymore, unfortunately, but so he had some good experience of the recycling sector. As we're aware at the moment, the Environment Bill is just back in Parliament, and in there are draft clauses on waste and resource efficiency, Powers will be given to extend producer responsibility schemes. There'll be new charges on single-use plastics, and even a clause now to ban exporting plastic waste to non-OECD countries. Whilst legislation by many is felt obviously to be a blunt tool, if it's actually meant to help the recycling sector, then what we need to have from a farming perspective is a fair approach, one where the costs don't disproportionately fall on those at the base of the recycling supply chain. I have sat in too many farmer meetings where recycling costs were felt to be just that. With the legislative direction of travel, it's clear that policy is going to need to develop domestic solutions for the long term. It's no longer acceptable to see Western European plastic waste decorating, for example, the banks of the Mekong Delta. I recently saw some pictures on the internet of exactly that. In terms of seeking solutions, and this has already been mentioned, collaboration is essential. The number of players in this field are several. The government, and namely Defra, Environment Agency, and we've heard from Judy, the recycling sector, the processors, and indeed farmers. And under the NFU umbrella, we're already working with many of those people to look for solutions. Government really could usefully help support what we've already seen alluded to, and that's the circular economy. And on my slide there, it's very deliberate to put in bold the phrase reduce, reuse and recycle. If nothing else, we've learnt from COVID-19 that the Prime Minister can boil things down into 3 words. Well, I think those 3 words from a waste plastic point of view have similarities to getting key messages across and other things. Whatever we do, decisions going forward need good data and good facts. We can't afford knee-jerk policy decisions based on emotion going forward. We've actually got to get it right and more quickly and more urgently. And above all else, from the farming perspective, we actually need cost-effective solutions, realistic solutions that are good for productivity and environment. And in my book, that is the win-win situation that we all need, and I think we all aspire to. So next slide, please. That's my piece. Thank you, and thank you for listening. And I'll be very happy to answer any questions in the panel towards the end. Thank you. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thanks indeed. Very interesting, Simon, to get the perspective from the NFU. Stuart, if you're there, we've had a number of questions in, all the same, saying, will the presentations be available to us, please, afterwards?
Hi, Mike. It's just Rebecca. Yeah, the presentations will be sent over with a recording later today or tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Rebecca. So there's the answer to those of you that have come in. I have had one question in from 3 different sources for Judy, and it's going to be the exciting one, so we'll save that to the end. We've also had a question in on the plastic tax that comes in 2022. I can answer that. I'm sure you all know that from the 4th of April 2022, there will be a tax of £200 a tonne on all plastic packaging which does not contain 30% recycled content. This doesn't impact greatly on the agricultural sector, with the exception of feed sacks and containers for chemicals. That's because the majority of waste plastics which originates in the agricultural sector is either silage wrap, stretch wrap, pit cover, crop cover, mulch films, polytunnel films and greenhouse films. And all of these, under the packaging waste regulations, are deemed as product and not packaging. And the plastic tax only applies to plastic packaging. And as I say, the majority of agricultural films, or in fact all agricultural films, are classified as product and not packaging, and thus will not be caught within the tax. So I hope that answers that question for you, Darimax. So on to our next speaker. And if we could have the next speaker bio, please, Becky. So our next speaker, absolutely delighted to have an international speaker to give an international perspective. Barry Frisson is the Executive Director for Clean Farms in Canada. And he got up at 4 o'clock this morning, his time, to be with us. So we all appreciate your dedication, Barry. Barry's organisation is, for want of a better word, a collection scheme. It's been operating for 10 years. And in fact, we've got a business in Canada, Barry, that manufactures agricultural films. And I know that we've been very collaborative with this. So Barry, once again, thanks for joining us. Thanks for getting up early, and the floor's yours.
Well, thank you, Mike, and welcome, and very, very pleased to be able to be talking to you. And thanks to Stuart and his team as well for putting this excellent seminar together. And as Mike had mentioned, Barry BPI, or Barry Global, is a valuable member of Clean Farms. We're very pleased, and in fact, the local fellow that runs the operations here in Canada and a few other plants in North America actually sits on my board. So very, very pleased to have their support. So I'll be talking about expanding opportunities to recycle agricultural plastics across Canada, and all of the things that you've talked about so far today is the same discussion that's happening in Canada, just sometimes a little bit different, and but the flavor sounds so familiar. So maybe we could move on to the next slide. So today I'm going to be talking about Clean Farms, who we are, what our overview, an overview of us, our current challenges in Canada, achievements to date, and what might be coming up next. So moving on. So who is Clean Farms? We manage inorganic agricultural waste across Canada. We operate in both official languages, French and English. So our English brand name is Clean Farms, French Agri-Group. And we are a not-for-profit industry steward organization committed to environmental responsibility through proper management of inorganic agricultural waste. And our members are funded by the crop protection industry, crop inputs, animal health medications, and agricultural plastics industries, including Barry BPI. Maybe move on to the next. And there's a smattering of our current members. We are growing because we're growing our programming. You'll see a number of very familiar logos there, and then a few non-familiar ones that would be unique to Canada. And without staying on, let's move to the next. I should note from the previous slide is that we are industry-led and industry-funded. So typically, this very simple graphic shows that farmers are generating agricultural plastics on the farm. We have, and you'll hear about this a bit later, is we have quite a geography in Canada. And so we utilize, it is a bit of a shared responsibility. We ask the farmers to bring their materials back to, they have to do something, bring their materials to a collection site. And then that is where our job, our physical job starts, and that's collecting those materials and sending them to the market, either to recycling markets, the vast majority of the material, but there are materials that we have to either dispose or in landfill or energy from waste facilities. Move on to the next. So really the big discussion is our challenges. We have 4 key challenges across Canada. One is geography, because we have a massive expanse that we have to deal with. The diversity in agriculture, because it's so wide, we have different climate areas and different growing conditions, different soils, the climate, and as a result, there are different types of agriculture going on across Canada, and we have to deal with that. It is a multi-level extended producer responsibility scheme in Canada, Canada, and you'll see this on the map. We have 10 provinces and 3 territories, and non-hazardous waste is a responsibility of each one of those provinces and territories. So, and everyone is essentially an island. They all have the right idea on how they want to do things, and it's always different, almost always different. And our fourth challenge is that dealing with marketed materials. It's a global issue and as well as a local issue. We'll move on. Next slide. So, challenge number 1, our geography. A relatively small amount of waste is generated in Canada in agriculture across a vast area of land. I noted that the previous survey from the Environmental Agency said that 3% of all the plastics in the UK is agricultural waste. It's actually estimated to be smaller in Canada, only about 1% of the plastic being generated. Partly depends on what the benchmark is, but the reality is a small amount of waste in the grand scheme of things, but very, very important. When you think about things like pesticide containers, it may be a small amount of plastic, but a very important stream to manage safely, and it can be done safely and positively into a new environmental product. Canada has 10 million square kilometers compared to the entire EU of 4.5 million square kilometers. So a lot of, very sparsely populated in the northern regions. So it's a lot denser in various areas. The city that I live in Toronto, or the greater Toronto area, has 5 million people. So it is quite dense in some areas, but then quite sparse in others. Disposal options, unfortunately, maybe not in the cities, but in the rural areas, are plentiful and relatively inexpensive. In fact, in some of our very heavy farming areas, some of the landfills that take waste from local residents is free. They can pay their material, drop them off for free. It's paid for through the tax base, and they put very little effort into landfilling it. And that's a tough thing to compete against. When we operate and offer new services that cost money, it's very, very difficult. And so the schemes, most of the schemes in Canada have to be put in place to make sure that when people drop materials off, that it's free, so that all the cost of the program is paid for upfront. Inorganic on-farm waste is estimated, now we are updating that estimate, but right now we're estimating about 40,000 tons a year of agricultural plastics are generated every year. That's plastic containers, grain bags, twine, bale and silage film, and the like, from greenhouse operations and like those materials that stay on the farm. I'd also like to note that it was interesting how in the UK you have made a definition of product versus packaging, and therein lies some of the differences in Canada. In some provinces of Canada, they've defined materials used as a package later on to be such as bale wrap and grain bags. It's sold as a product, but used as a package. Under their definitions, it becomes a package. Yet in their neighboring provinces, it will follow the UK definition that it is not exclusively sold as a package, and it is a product. So hence that, the challenge globally, definitions and getting things right and harmonization is very important. As I mentioned, agricultural plastic is estimated to be about 1% of the annual plastic generation in Canada. And of course, because of the vast geography and the coast-to-coast operations we have, accessibility is very, very important, providing convenient collection options for geographically diverse users while maintaining cost efficiencies. It is very challenging. Maybe move on to the next, please. A little bit more about diversity in ag. There's a map of Canada. As I said, we have 10 provinces. There are 3 territories, 3 up north, and there actually is some agriculture starting. And in fact, as global warming takes its pace, we're actually seeing new areas opening up for agriculture. Now, currently, we're not operating in those territories. It's a very small agricultural happening, but we will be prepared to go up there if we need to. There are regional variations in climate and crops. Probably the largest is that grain and oil seeds. That's where 80% of our chemicals are used, for instance, and a very, very heavy agricultural region. Canada is an exporter of a good portion of its grains and oil seeds, and in fact, pulse products are over 90% of it exported and only 10% used. So very, very important for global trade. We have a variety of packaging formats that are used to managing this packaging and product formats in plastics. We also have 190,000 farms in Canada, and there's 1,200 and sometimes higher collection sites. Maybe move on to the next. We have 5 core programs, and we are growing. The first 5, and I've done them both in French and English here, are the first 5 containers up to 23 liters in size, fertilizer and pesticide containers. What we're not currently collecting are disinfectant containers, primarily used in the dairy industry. That will be coming very shortly. Totes and drums, all the way up to 1,000-liter totes. Bags and large tote bags, big bags or super sacks, as people call them. Unwanted pesticides and livestock medications. That's not for recycling, that's for safe disposal through it via high temperature incineration. And one of our newer programs, grain bags. And and those are the 5 that are permanent that we're operating. The newer ones are the twine, bale wrap, and silage film. We have a number of pilot programs and some slated for permanent programs by the end of next year. And then we have a number of research and pilot projects and consultation underway right now. Moving on. Wanted to talk to you just a little to give you a flavor of what's going on in Canada. And agriculture is not exempt from this. It had been to a certain extent. Our programs, particularly our container program, has been in existence since 1989, before before EPR was a common, extended producer responsibility was a common term in waste fields and discussions. It was the crop protection industry actually got together and started collecting pesticide containers, the small ones under 23 liter in size, voluntarily, and continues to do that voluntarily with very high collection results. A lot of voluntary programs started in Canada and around the world, but essentially failed. They had single-digit collection results. We actually get over 70% of those containers. But I wanted to talk a little bit about EPR, and this is sort of the thing that one of the big challenges that we deal with is the fact that it's across so many different areas. There's 120 programs across Canada, every province and every territory responsible for managing these things, and it's quite diverse. And unfortunately, from one province to the next, often they're totally different programs because of different regulation and legislation. Maybe move on to the next slide. And I'll go through very quickly. This is the map of Canada. The first click will give you the packaging and printed paper and consumer containers. Some are deposit programs, some are not. Then the household hazardous waste and fluorescent bulbs are also collected in some provinces, not everyone, depending on the legislation. Next are batteries. And after that are electronic programs. Virtually all the provinces have them, waste electronic and electrical equipment. Pharmaceuticals and sharps in some provinces, not others. Tires and automotive containers, that would be oil containers and oil filters. And then finally is the agricultural waste programs. And that, the difference between us and them, so to speak, and all the other programs is the fact that we are one company that operates in virtually all the jurisdictions. We currently do not operate in the territories, but we will if we need to. Maybe move on to the next slide. And I won't get you to, I won't rhyme off all these, but this really gives you a flavor for If you supply products into the Canadian market, you have a lot of people that you've got to talk to. If you're supplying, whether it be a beverage container, whether it be a computer or a computer mouse or whatever it may be that you provide into the country, you're going to have to talk to a lot of different people to make sure that you're in compliance with each of the regular provincial and territorial schemes. The Clean Farms difference is the fact that we operate coast to coast and you have one portal to go to. And most of the other schemes, you have multiple portals to go to and have to deal with fees based on which province and territory you operate in. Maybe move on. So, EPR legislation and Clean Farms. Most Clean Farms programs are voluntary with 3 exceptions. Our grain bag program in Saskatchewan is mandatory. It will soon be in Manitoba and in Alberta, where we're operating as well. Our container programs are, which, as I mentioned earlier, was voluntary, is now mandatory in 2 provinces in Manitoba and Quebec. And EPR legislation can help the level the playing field. Although we note that where we have programs that operate very well with voluntary schemes, we don't necessarily need the legislation and regulation, but we're not afraid of it. It will increase funding to promote recovery, but we do note to all of the agriculture industry that operating programs before legislation permits fine-tuning costing approaches to provide insights for potential regulations. Move on to the next. So our 4th challenge has been markets and materials, and we are not alone. As I remind my board every board meeting, I'm not responsible for the fact that there's been a global meltdown in plastic pricing. We're challenged by these low market prices of plastics and competition for end markets. After the Chinese put in their national sword and stopped taking plastics, some of the markets actually collapsed in North America for some of our products. We were able to stockpile and weather that storm quite nicely. We had to readjust some of our pricing, but fortunately, fortunately, we don't collect that much yet. There's a lot on the horizon, and fortunately, there are new manufacturers and recyclers that are opening up in Canada that will help deal with this. So we do seek market predictability with domestic markets, and this year has been particularly successful. Market prices have been low, but we've benefited from all of our products. And of course, materials, the quantity, the diversity of materials and geography is a real challenge for us for scale and logistics, as well meeting our quality standards. Move on to the next. I think we're in the home stretch here. So just a little bit about achievements, steadily increasing collection. So we collect about, currently last year we collected 5.5 million small containers, which is really a small number of containers in the grand scheme of things. But because we had to collect it coast to coast, it was a lot of logistics and 1,100 collection sites for these small containers. 55,000 bulk containers and totes, non-deposit ones. I will note that the pesticide industry has been very good. 40% of the pesticides are delivered in reusable totes. Those eventually come out of service, and we manage those too when they do come out of service. But the 40% of it that is in refillables carries a deposit and a good incentive for farmers to bring them back. Our empty seed, pesticide, and fertilizer bags have been collected. We collected in half the country right now, and we were to collect it, expand it this year. This was the one COVID casualty we had. We put it on 1-year hiatus, and it will start up again next year. And so that we're going to be collecting coast to coast seed, pesticide, and fertilizer bags. Our unwanted program, this is leftover pesticides and animal health livestock meds are collected. They're collected in every province every 3 years, and very, very successful. These are not cannot be recycled. They're destroyed through hazardous waste incinerators. And finally, our newest program, we collected last year 2,300 tons of grain bags. and a lot of them are manufactured by Berry BPI. Move on to the next. So our next steps. We are currently collecting about 10% of the agricultural plastics generated on farm. Some of the low-hanging fruit are things in the dairy and beef industry, twine netting and bale and silage wrap, which is a big component. There are a few unique things in Canada. For instance, maple syrup tubing. We have a big maple syrup industry. There's about 3,000 tons of maple syrup tubing, most of it in one province in Canada, where the climate is right and the growing conditions are good. So our next steps are to increase recovery in existing programs. We're on track to manage all of the materials, and the key goal is to be able to get good participation. We want to convert a lot of the pilot programs to permanent programs that are happening now. We're just on the cusp of moving into some major new tonnages and new industries. We do pilot the recovery of new materials in different regions to figure out what works best, because we have two national languages and very diverse growing regions. We have to pilot things to make sure it works, what works best in the local area. Expanding end markets, I'm quite pleased to see that there's some brand new facilities being opened up to collect or to manage the plastics that we collect. And harmonizing programs, as I mentioned, great diversity in geography, but also in the approach to EPR. So harmonizing things to make sure that we continue to have one portal for our members is very, very important. And I think that's the last slide. Yes. So thank you for the opportunity. This is great to learn from you, as well as to pass on some of the stuff that we're doing.
Well, that was very interesting. Thanks very much, Barry. And Barry, it's a your scheme. It's a voluntary scheme, I assume. It's not underpinned by legislation.
It is starting to be. The crop protection industry were the pioneers of this, and they started it voluntarily. But as we're moving into new products, the grain bags, for instance, had to be regulated. Most of the new programs will all be regulated, and we're preparing for all of our voluntary programs to shift into under some sort of regulatory scheme.
Thank you. Very interesting. So we come to, I've still got more questions coming in, by the way, that keep sending them in, and we'll deal with them at the end. So our last speaker today is going to give us a different, and I'm sure this is going to generate a lot of questions as well. Frans Krauss is the Director of Public Affairs for TEPA, and the discussion will be around the role of compostables. And I know I can already hear the questions start to coming in, Frans. So please give us your presentation first, and then we'll move on afterwards. And thank you for joining us this morning from Austria, I think.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. Honored to be on this panel. And it's not Austria. I'm actually German, even though I'm from Bavaria. And I'm based and have been for the last 20 years out of Brussels in Belgium. I work as Director of Public Affairs, as you said, for TEPA. TEPA is an Israeli startup that produces compostable, flexible packaging, all of which is certified according to European, US, or Australian standards. I want to present to you on how compostable packaging can be a solution for the future, and how it fits into what was presented by my previous speakers. Next slide, please. Most of the plastic produced today is used in packaging, and of packaging, about 70% is used for food packaging. This number has greatly increased with COVID, as you know yourselves. The food packaging in the aisles of your supermarkets have greatly increased because of sanitary concerns of consumers. With restaurants being shut down, delivery has taken up, online sales have taken up. And if you can believe prognostics, such as a recent one by McKinsey, this is here to stay. Food will continue to be bought online. We'll see a lot more flexible packaging on the market. Next slide, please. So TIPA, as I said, focuses on flexible packaging. Currently, 40% of all consumer goods are packaged in flexible packaging. By weight, flexibles present about a quarter of all plastic waste generated in the UK. Flexible packaging is a way to protect our food, but also to extend shelf life of food that we buy. Next slide, please. Now, I think this is a very shocking figure. 4% of all flexible plastic is currently recycled. That is the figure for Europe, including the UK. And that's why we want to address as TIPA and focus mainly on the area of flexible packaging. Next slide, please. Flexible packaging is often not recycled. The reasons are because it's simply not feasible, or when it's feasible, it's often not economically viable. And even when it's economically viable, it's sometimes not doable because of regulatory concerns. A lot of flexible packaging ends up in our oceans. There's a very, if you haven't read it, a very good report that came out done by Systemic and the Pew Foundation's called Breaking the Plastic Wave, which looks into what type of solutions are already in place at the moment to address the problem of plastic contamination. It comes up with a figure of 11 million tons of plastic, which is being discarded in our oceans every year. And almost 8 million of this plastic is flexible plastic. Next slide, please. Now, jumping across the channel, the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands has done a study commissioned by the Dutch government, and I'll come back to the results later. But it also found that almost 50% of plastic contamination in food collection bins was flexible packaging. The study attributed most of this waste to the fact that people were simply throwing away their food scraps together with the packaging. Just imagine you have, I don't know, a bag of salad packaged, which has gone off. Are you really going to peel out the salad, or are you going to throw away the whole pack? Next slide, please. Now, here's where TIPA comes in, and where the idea for compostable packaging comes from. So compostable packaging emulates in many ways the functionality of conventional plastic. We try to get as close as possible to the specificities of PE and PP when it comes to shelf life, when it comes to barrier functionalities. But when it comes to the end of life, compostable packaging emulates food waste and any bio waste. And the orange peel, which you see there, is also mentioned in the Wageningen research, which I just mentioned. The study comes to the result that when compostable packaging, which is certified according to the standards which are currently in place, makes it to where its destined end of life is into compost facilities, it completely breaks down. It breaks down even better than orange peels, because what they found is that they didn't find any residue of compostable packaging in the final compost, but they still found pieces of orange peel in there. Next slide, please. Now back to the UK. According to WRAP, 81% of flexible packaging is food contaminated. In Italy, a system was put in place more than a decade ago that uses compostable bags to collect food. And it has shown that it was successful, since it has brought down the contamination rate of plastic in residential food waste bins down from 8% to down 1.5%. So it shows that when it is used in a large scale, compostable packaging can help to solve the problem of getting rid of food contaminated plastic in food waste. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, this raises the question of which is often addressed to us, that when compost facilities are not made to get rid of plastic. They are made to deal with food waste and with green waste. Jumping over the pond and to another study by BPI, which is the certification body for North America, and CMA, which represents composters, which has found that in trials, even if you move the input rate of compostable packaging to 30%, it would not have any impact on the quality of the finished compost. Now let's take a hypothetical case of what would happen if all the packaging in the UK, for example, were switched over to compostables. We have currently about 9.5 million tons of food waste in the UK. We have about 1.5 million tons of plastic waste. Now, even in this case, we would only have a rate of 15%, but that's not something that we want, because we do not want to replace every plastic. Compostable packaging is not a silver bullet solution for everything. It is a solution for where there is currently no other solution. And when it serves to bring bio-waste safely back to the world, to the soil without contaminating it with plastic. Next slide, please. So according to the Sustainable Soil Association, 33% of UK soils are degraded. Compost is a way out of this. It can be it is an organic fertilizer that can help us solve this problem, and it can help us retrieve carbon back to soil to assure the fertility of our soils. We have to make sure that this compost is not contaminated with plastic. And I think Judy mentioned in the beginning the limits for permitted non-compostable plastic contamination as moving down to 0.25%, as is currently prescribed by EU regulation, the EU fertilizer regulation, which was just revised last year. If you go up to Scotland, they have even tougher limits already imposed, and hopefully this will be reinforced in England as well. So as compostable packaging, we want to play our role to simply get rid of plastic in the end, and for it not to contaminate the soils where we grow our food on. Next slide, please. So I'm already at my last slide because I know there will be many questions. Our vision and our mission is for compostable packaging to replace the hard to recycle flexible plastic with our compostable solutions, and for this to be collected and treated with bio-waste. Previous speakers have mentioned a number of policy issues that are coming up. The Environment Bill is currently on the table. It has a great opportunity of helping us set a regulatory environment that helps us get rid of plastic waste in our soils. And for example, by setting targets for conventional single-use plastics, the plastic tax was mentioned as well. It would help a great deal if our products, bio-based and compostable packaging, were exempted from the scope of the tax, because we provide a sustainable solution that provides a solution to the plastic contamination of our soils. We are happy that the NFU is also supporting an exemption for our product. We are waiting for Defra to position itself and also to opt and support an exemption of our products from the scope of the tax, because it would greatly not only hit us financially, but especially reputationally. And we need to be able to provide solutions. You need to differentiate our products from conventional plastic. Also, we have a great opportunity in the environment bill now, giving us the opportunity to use compostable packaging in collecting bio-waste, which and to put it in the bio-waste collection, which is currently already in place in Italy, as we said, and in Ireland. Maybe a word on for what Barry mentioned as an EPR scheme, and just to mention that Italy just a few days ago was the first country in the world of setting up a regulated EPR scheme for compostables, showing the way of what could be a solution. So happily work together with whoever wants to work with us in finding solutions, because in the end, we have to use the solutions which we have at hand and work together instead of stepping on each other's toes. Thank you.
Thank you, Franz. We've got 20 minutes now to do the questions, and I've got quite a few, and I'm going to work through them in order with how they came in. This first question is for you, Judy, and comes from David Newman at the BBIA. And I've also had similar questions from other viewers of the presentation today. And it just says, Judy, the EU, Scotland and Wales is banning oxo-degradable plastics, which are widely used as a soil mulch. I don't know about that, but certainly there has been a debate around oxos, and as I say, yep, David's right, it's been banned in a lot of places. Will you be supporting this ban in England too? And a follow-up question from Jeff Mackey says, has the EA got a clear position on oxo-degradables?
Hi, thank you. And thanks, David, as well for the question. So around oxo-degradables, we are, it's a policy decision, and it is one that Defra is considering at the moment. So it's one we're expecting to hear from them shortly. So there was a call for evidence around biodegradable and compostable plastics, particularly around the standards side. And we're also expecting Defra to publish that response to that call for evidence. And what I believe is that it will also reference oxo-degradable. So it is a policy decision. We're expecting it shortly. And obviously we'll work with the regulatory framework within that policy. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, some of us have been involved in this one for many years. Certainly, I think I can say that as far as the UK recycling industry overwhelmingly concerned, the big fear is that if the waste stream gets contaminated with oxo material, this means that expansion of the market for greater use of recyclate is restricted, because customers get very nervous about using recycled material which might be contaminated. So some more questions, and this one's aimed for you, Simon, and it's to do with lower GHG emissions, which you mentioned in your presentation. Another question here on the same issue, if I can find it in the vast number of questions I've got. And I've just had one in on compostables as well. Hold on, just getting my system to work. So when Simon mentions a benefit of using plastic is lowered GHG emissions, does this take into account GHG emitted during the production and disposal of plastics? Difficult one, Simon, but could you have a go at that?
Hello. Yeah. I can't answer that specifically because actually there are different ways of calculating greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's part of the problem that all industries are having to reckon up with. In farming, we have aspirations on net zero, and the first thing that most farmers have got to do is actually work out what their carbon accountability is. And there are numerous things now in the marketplace whereby they can put a system, put an auditing system down and do that, which doesn't help because they all have different metrics. But yeah, so in some cases, what the reference to lowered greenhouse emissions in my presentation was really that there are, where plastic is used as an alternative to other materials, then that can lower greenhouse gas emissions. Sorry, I haven't got specifics. But in a broad sense, if you think about it, if plastics can help reduce food waste because of packaging technology, etc., then reducing food waste has its impact on greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Thank you. I realise that's a difficult question. As regards food waste, I mean, I'm obviously not speaking for RAP, but I know that RAP have said that there isn't a lot of point moving from one material to another material or stopping using a material, not necessarily plastics, if that increases food waste, because food waste is obviously one of the biggest components in the waste stream. And the other thing I would say is it's something that we all believe in. But this, as I said earlier, this debate must be science-based. It absolutely 100% must be science-based. I've had a question in from Simon Stringer, NIPAC. I'm not sure who to aim this one at. It says, will there be EPR on farm plastics? Could I say that the voluntary scheme that was launched at the Recoup conference last year from APE is a form of EPR. So I think that EPR for farm plastics will come. I think that's almost inevitable, and it's a good thing. Will farm plastics be caught within the regulatory change in 2023 on EPR is a bit more difficult to answer because, as many of you will know, the sounding boards on EPR, the engagement with stakeholders, is taking place right now. So if any of you have got any views, then this is the time to do it. The next consultation document on EPR from Defra will come out early next year, we think. And again, that will give anyone who wants to join the debate the opportunity, and I think it's important that as many people as possible do respond to the Defra consultation when it comes out. But in answer to Simon's question, unless Judy can add to this, will there be EPR on farm plastics? I think at the moment it's just something that's under debate. Judy, what do you think?
I agree. It's something that is under debate, and I would just encourage everybody, as you said, to engage in that consultation, and particularly providing evidence around tonnages and costs and benefits is what will be of interest to Defra. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. And just for Barry on something you said. There is a statutory scheme for farm plastics underpinned by regulation in Ireland. It's called IFFPG, the Irish Farm Films Producers Group, and it's underpinned by regulation from the Irish government. So it's a statutory EPR scheme for farm plastics, and it's very successful. And I think Sian's on the call. Perhaps she could tell me, or email me, or text me. I think they get a 70% recovery rate now in Ireland, and that is demonstrating that a scheme underpinned by regulation does work. As I say, in the UK, the APE voluntary scheme was launched last year, and there are collectors of waste farm plastics covering most areas of the UK in existence now. But as somebody earlier said, that the cost is disproportionate. By that I mean, if you're a farmer way out in the middle of nowhere, you're probably going to pay a little bit more to have your waste farm plastics collected, as opposed to if you're near a collector. And the idea of a scheme is that it levels the playing field for all farmers, which obviously is important. I have had a question from an anonymous attendee, which it's a new one on me. I thought was that. It says, do you have any information on plastic COVID tax recovery plan that comes into place in January 2021? I personally wasn't aware that there is a plastic COVID tax recovery plan coming into place in January 2021. Judy, have you got any information on that?
I'm afraid I haven't either. No.
I hadn't heard of it. Oh, well, we'll move on. Let me just go down to the bottom of my questions. Right. I've had a question from this is quite a nice one, anonymous attendee for Franz. It says, what is the carbon footprint in the creation of TEPA films, and what materials are used in its creation, and does it break down to microplastics? Does it break down in typical UK temperatures? So a number of questions there for you, Franz. First of all, have you got any figures on the carbon footprint of what it takes to create the TEPA films? What are the materials? And does it break down into microplastics and UK temperature?
Unfortunately, I don't have any figures. Thank you for the question, Mike. We are looking into, as was said, I think by Simon before, there's many different ways of calculating life cycle analysis and calculating carbon footprint. And you just choose and pick the input criteria which best suit your purpose. The purpose and the objective of compostable packaging is to break down and not to leave anything behind when it disintegrates and decomposes in soil. So that is the end of life which we are focusing on. What we are being made of is, what our products are being made of is a blend of bio-based and fossil-based polymers. So we have to use fossil-based, or we still have to use fossil-based polymers, because we need to achieve similar specificities as PP and PE when it comes to shelf life and other functionalities of flexible packaging. Now, as we go forward, we will certainly increase the amount of bio-based content in our products. But for some of the specificities, the polymers simply do not exist or are not available in sufficient qualities. So we are constantly improving the recipes of the packaging which we produce. And to the last question about microplastics, I mentioned the Wageningen study commissioned by the Dutch government, which shows that certified material does break down when it is put to the end of life where it is destined to be, that is in composting facilities, or we also have a big range of home compostable solutions. When you actually put it into a compost environment, there's other studies, even in markets and environments which are very, for the moment, still very hostile towards compostable solutions. And here I think of my native Germany. The University of Bayreuth in June came up with a study which looks into residue in compost and looks into even below the cutoff point for microplastics, and it finds that there is almost none left. The only more than 98% of the plastic residue found in compost is conventional plastic. So it shows that, you know, compostable packaging material does break down to a molecular and submolecular size that can then be digested by microorganisms.
Okay, thank you. A few points of information, thanks to my colleague Sean, who's texting me. The collection rate, Barry, for the statutory scheme in Ireland, Irish Farm Films, is 75%. And when you think of leakage, that's pretty close to the 100% we all want. And in answer to the question on the COVID-19, I should have put 2 and 2 together and made 6 myself on that. Of course, I think that you're referring to, on the plastics COVID-19 recovery, to the European Union non-recycled tax. It's nothing to do with farm plastics, but just so you all know, that came into effect on the 1st of January, actually this year, but gets collected next year. But it doesn't apply to the UK, and it does apply to all the other 27. If anybody wants, now's not the place to talk about it, but if you want to know about the European Union, what's called non-recycled tax of €800 a ton, either drop Stuart an email and he'll forward it to me, or forward it on. Now we come to the question. I don't know who's going to answer this. Possibly Stuart would be the most suitable. I have my own views, but as chair, I really should be neutral. And it says, compostable is excellent for soil and plastic management. How does this support the concept of circular economy for plastics, oblique resource efficiency? And the point of Recoup, the recycling of used plastics, is that we are a charity that promotes the recycling of used plastics. And it's pretty obvious that if you compost them, you can't recycle them. So question is, how does compostability support the circular economy? Has anyone got a view on that on the panel?
I certainly have, Mike, if I may. But if anybody wants to speak first. I said before, compostables objective is to bring carbon safely back to soil without plastic contamination. So as you justly say, the whole objective is for it to disappear and not to cause contamination. However, it does bring the carbon back to soil, and the carbon then again is used to grow more bio-based material, which can then be used as more raw material. As we go forward, currently, most of bio-based composting packaging is based on raw materials such as cornstarch or sugarcane. But as we go forward in the next generation, we'll be looking into using food scraps as a basis, as a raw material for the polymers, which will be put on the market in the future. Even into capturing the CO2 and turning them once again into raw materials. So a lot of research is being needed and is out there, and a lot of funds are out there to look into research. So there's a lot of exciting things that are going to happen on compostables in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Could I add to that?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, it's Trevor here. On the circular economy point, really, it's a very interesting one about the role that composting can play, and clearly recycling, as I mentioned in earlier, the sort of what we call our 7 Rs about rethinking, redesigning, remanufacturing. All of those are part of the world of circular economy, but I think you could probably regard composting as a very natural way of remanufacture, because you're essentially taking one component and using it to produce something useful. So where you can't reduce, where you can't eliminate that product in the first place, I think there's a mechanism by which, through a natural process, you create something new, different, and useful from that waste material, and that's perfectly in line with the circular economy approach.
Okay, thank you. We've got 4 minutes left. I've got a very interesting question here. Very interesting question for Simon, and it's from Cheryl, and it says, it would be interesting to hear the view of the NFU as regards to EPR on farm plastics, and to what level should farmers contribute? Okay,
thank you, Mike. I don't think I'll comment on what level farmers should contribute, because I'm not in a position to be able to do that. But I think the thing that strikes me in all of this, and this is a little bit like packaging regulations and that's that, is that at the end of the day, many farm businesses are price takers and not price makers. We can't necessarily and very easily put costs like this out into the consumer's food basket. We have to go through the supermarket chains by and large to be able to do that. So it actually is quite difficult for much as the farming side of the supply chain to start trying to absorb costs without actually seeing it come back the other way. So that I think is in the back of our minds as we respond to EPR. It'll be very much in the back of our minds in terms of the potential expense on this in terms of the cost of businesses. And it really doesn't help us as an industry to have to sort of sidestep these sorts of issues when what we've been talking about this morning is everybody needs to think sensibly and innovatively as to how we deal with this problem without actually lumping costs onto all sectors of the industry, or maybe just making sure it's spread out as evenly as possible. But the problem is that people put their hands up and sometimes, and some people don't put their hands up. So yeah, it's something which is on our radar. I know haven't seen a specific response. I'd need to dig out the pages of stuff we've got on environment currently, which Westminster office will be going through in a micro way. So yeah, it's on our radar.
Thank you, Simon. We're almost out of time. I don't know if Stuart wants to say a few words before we close. I have had a number of other questions in which we haven't had time to answer. So if particularly anonymous attendee, what are the recovery rates in England and Wales currently? I assume you're talking about farm plastics. If you drop me an email, I haven't got those figures to hand, but I can provide you with them. It's a matter of interest. The recovery rates are higher than you might think. But as Judy said, it's what happens to it once it's been recovered. And that's the question. So thanks indeed to our speakers, Judy, Simon, Barry, it's been, and Franz, it's been great having you on board. I hope next year we can meet in Peterborough and you can all join us in the hotel for dinner the night before, and a glass of red wine, which is always a great event, as you know, if you've been there. Thanks to Recoup for organising this great event. There are more in the calendar between now and the end of the month, not on farm plastics, but on other issues. If you go onto the Recoup website, www.recoup.org, you'll find that. Thank all of you for taking the time to attend. Stuart, do you wish to make some closing remarks?
It's had to jump off, so I just want to thank everybody for attending today. and I'll get all the questions and answers sent over to the speakers, so then we get them out to everybody as quick as possible.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for organising this and putting all the slides through. It is exactly 11:45, which is the scheduled end. So from me, Mike Baxter, and all the panelists, thank you all for attending. Bye.
Well done. Thank you very much.